It's one of the greatest success stories in space exploration. Despite traveling through space since 1977, the two Voyager probes continue their groundbreaking research mission even today. These identical twin spacecraft have now ventured beyond the boundaries of our solar system, giving us an unprecedented glimpse into the vast unknown of interstellar space. But while their achievements are nothing short of extraordinary, there's another side to their story, one that reveals the challenges of operating spacecraft that have been in service for nearly half a century. Voyager 1 in particular recently faced a serious technical issue that nearly silenced it forever. For a moment, it seemed like we might have to say a final goodbye to the legendary probe. A critical malfunction threatened to cut off communication, putting an end to its historic journey. However, NASA engineers managed to breathe new life into the aging spacecraft through an extremely risky maneuver. While this fix bought some time, the reality is that the longest-running space mission in history is slowly approaching its inevitable conclusion. Nearly 50 years in the harsh environment of space has taken its toll. Over the years, both Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 have experienced their fair share of technical troubles. One of the most notable occurred in the spring of 2022, when Voyager 1 began transmitting strange, nonsensical telemetry data back to Earth. Although the spacecraft was otherwise functioning as expected, the data simply didn't make sense. It took NASA scientists several months to identify the source of the problem. The issue? Voyager 1's attitude control system had mistakenly tried to send its data through an onboard computer that had been shut down long ago. While experts were unable to determine why this happened, they did manage to redirect the data back to a still-functioning computer using the Deep Space Network's powerful radio antennas. But, as the saying goes, when it rains, it pours. Just a few months later, another major issue surfaced, this time with Voyager 2. A simple mistake caused its antenna to misalign by just 2 degrees, which might not seem like much, but in the vastness of space, it was enough to cause a huge problem. The antenna was no longer pointing toward Earth, meaning the probe's data transmissions were missing their target entirely. The only solution? An interstellar scream. Since Voyager 2 was nearly 20 billion kilometers away from Earth at the time, sending a correction command was no easy task. It took an agonizing 18.5 hours for the signal to reach the probe, and another 18.5 hours for NASA to receive a response. That meant scientists had to wait a full 37 hours to find out whether their desperate attempt had worked. When the long-awaited reply finally arrived, there was a collective sigh of relief. Voyager 2 was back in communication. The Voyager mission has always been about pushing the limits of what's possible, and time and again, NASA engineers have performed what can only be described as technical miracles to keep these aging probes alive. But even after these latest challenges were overcome, the team behind the Voyager program found themselves facing yet another set of obstacles. On November 14, 2023, Voyager 1 made headlines once again when it suddenly lost the ability to properly package and transmit its invaluable data from interstellar space to Earth. The culprit? A defect in the spacecraft's Flight Data System, or FDS, the crucial onboard computer responsible for collecting data from Voyager's scientific instruments and other hardware. Normally, the FDS converts this information into a compact digital packet of ones and zeros before passing it along to the Telemetry Modulation Unit, or TMU, which then beams it back to Earth. But somewhere along this process, something went wrong. The communication link between the FDS and TMU had broken down. As a result, the TMU could only transmit a never-ending loop of meaningless ones and zeros, like a stuck record. NASA engineers immediately jumped into action, attempting to restart the FDS on December 23rd, but the first rescue attempt was unsuccessful. It seemed like Voyager 1 had finally reached a point of no return. Some experts even admitted that it would take nothing short of a miracle to bring the ancient probe back to life. And yet, miracles do happen. In April of this year, NASA finally announced the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. Voyager 1 was transmitting data once again. But getting to this point had been no easy feat. After months of meticulous troubleshooting, engineers discovered the root of the issue, a defective microchip within the FDS. This chip contained a critical piece of program code that verified and processed the data before transmission. With the chip damaged, the only way to restore Voyager 1's functionality was to relocate the missing program code and store it elsewhere in the onboard computer. However, there was one major obstacle. Storage space on Voyager 1's outdated systems was extremely limited. The engineers needed to get creative. Instead of trying to fit the program code into one location, they decided to break it into smaller pieces and distribute them across different sections of the FDS. But this required an entirely new approach. Every reference to the original storage location had to be rewritten, and additional script lines had to be inserted to guide the onboard computer through the fragmented code. Finally, after months of planning and execution, the updated code was transmitted to Voyager 1, and soon after, the probe responded with the long-awaited technical data. Step by step, NASA engineers continued refining the fix, and eventually Voyager 1 began transmitting scientifically valuable data from its interstellar mission once again. But while this was a major victory, NASA wasn't just focused on fixing emergencies. They were also thinking about the future. To extend the lifespan of the Voyager probes for as long as possible, the team implemented a series of energy-saving measures. One of the most notable changes was the shutdown of a backup system designed to absorb voltage fluctuations. By turning it off, NASA was able to redirect its reserved power to Voyager's scientific instruments, ensuring they remain operational for as long as possible. However, not all problems can be solved with clever workarounds. One looming issue that engineers have yet to fully address is the state of Voyager 1's fuel lines. After nearly 5 decades in space, the lines have become so clogged and aged that they pose a serious risk to the probe's stability, and unfortunately, there's no simple fix for this particular challenge. The decision was made to turn off one of Voyager 1's main heating units, a choice that was not taken lightly. The spacecraft depends on small positioning thrusters to keep its antenna precisely aligned with Earth, ensuring that data can be transmitted across billions of kilometers. These thrusters rely on liquid hydrazine fuel, delivering tiny bursts of thrust lasting only a few milliseconds at a time. But after nearly 50 years in space, even these reliable components have suffered the effects of age. When Voyager 1 first launched on September 5, 1977, it was equipped with 3 sets of thrusters, 1 for course corrections and 2 for attitude control. However, as the years passed, wear and tear forced NASA to adapt. By 2002, deposits in the fuel lines had clogged the first set of positioning thrusters, leading engineers to switch to the second set. But this was only a temporary solution. Over time, the second set also showed signs of clogging, prompting another switch in 2018. This time to the third set, originally designed for course corrections rather than fine adjustments. Now, 6 years later, this final set of nozzles is also in rough shape. In fact, the situation is even more critical than before. The course correction thrusters have deteriorated faster than the previous 2 sets. To put things into perspective, the fuel line openings that once measured 0.25 millimeters in diameter have now narrowed to just 0.035 millimeters, less than half the width of a human hair. The risk of complete failure was becoming too great, and NASA had no choice but to act. The only option left was to switch back to one of the earlier sets of thrusters. However, this was far from a straightforward process. due to Voyager 1's dwindling energy supply, even the smallest power adjustment could jeopardize the probe's survival. Restarting the deactivated thrusters required preheating them, but the limited power available meant that something else had to be shut down to make this possible. This presented NASA with a difficult dilemma. Every remaining system on Voyager 1 is essential, and shutting down any one of them could have irreversible consequences. If the scientific instruments were powered off, there was no guarantee they could be turned back on. After weeks of careful deliberation, engineers determined that the least risky option was to deactivate one of the main heating units. And so, with a calculated risk, the plan was put into action. On August 27, 2024, the shutdown was initiated, lasting for an hour while the nozzles preheated. To the NASA scientists monitoring the process, those 60 minutes must have felt like an eternity, especially knowing that every message sent to Voyager 1 takes about 22.5 hours to travel one way. But when the long-awaited response finally arrived, there was a collective sigh of relief. The thruster swap was a success. Voyager 1 could once again properly align its antenna with Earth and continue transmitting data. However, this victory comes with an expiration date. The reactivated thruster set isn't in perfect condition. It had already accumulated enough deposits to require its initial shutdown years ago. This means that at some point it, too, will become unusable. Meanwhile, NASA has also had to make sacrifices with Voyager 2. In an effort to conserve power, one of its 5 remaining scientific instruments was recently deactivated. Just like the previous power-saving measures, this step was necessary to extend the probe's operational lifespan. After careful consideration, scientists determined that the plasma sensor was the least critical instrument to keep running. As a result, its scientific use is now a thing of the past, but will this create significant gaps in Voyager 2's future data collection? Fortunately, the answer is no. The plasma sensor was originally designed to measure solar wind particles, meaning it was oriented toward the Sun. However, since Voyager 2 has long since entered interstellar space, the direction of plasma flow has reversed. Particles now move toward the Sun instead of away from it. This essentially rendered the plasma sensor ineffective, making its shutdown a logical choice. Luckily, Voyager 2's plasma wave subsystem remains active, ensuring that scientists can still detect plasma currents and turbulence in interstellar space. With all of these rescue operations and power-saving strategies, NASA hopes to keep both Voyager probes operational well into the 2030s. And at this point, it's worth remembering that when these twin probes launched in the 1970s, their expected lifespan was only 5 years. Yet, nearly 5 decades later, they are still pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Even when the day finally comes that Voyager 1 and 2 lose power and fall silent, their journey will not end. They will continue traveling through space, carrying humanity's message for millions, perhaps even billions, of years to come.